And now, the First Alert Storm Team, live from the 13 Now digital desk. This is Tropic Topics, sponsored by Peden Heating and Air Conditioning and Mariana Toyota.
Welcome, Tropic Topics. This is week 8, if I'm not mistaken. So this is.
I have lost count, honestly. So sorry.
Grace has already lost count of the number of shows that we have done. Yeah, I believe this is week 8, and we have a special week for you guys. Thankfully, not a whole lot going on in the tropics. So once again, we're going to have a relatively fun show, and that fun show is going to be really focused on hurricane hunters, really their mission, what is done while they're on the plane, that kind of thing. And for that, we have a special guest, and this is all thanks to our very own Grace Thornton that you see there. This is Nick Underwood, and if you aren't following him on Twitter, you should be doing that because he puts out some quality content, not to mention some absolutely excellent pictures, videos, things like that while he's chasing. Yeah, you heard me correctly. He takes pictures and videos while on the plane. So multi-talented man, not only getting information that we need, but also giving us the content that we want as well. So that Twitter, I don't know if we actually have his Twitter plugged in there, do we?
The Astro Nick.
It is the Astro Nick, correct?
That is correct.
Okay,
correct.
All right. So he can speak.
Sorry, it's a cool ad, you know? I know what it is.
There you go. Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, if you're new to the show, you can leave it in the comment section of any Facebook stream that you're watching this on, and we will be able to see it. I have them up in front of me, so my Facebook stream or the WMBB Facebook stream as well. If you're joining us on mypanhandle.com, absolutely love it. Continue to watch us there as well. But if you want to ask us a question, you're also going to have to get on Facebook to do that. Anyways, if you do that in the comment section, we will scroll through those and we will get those questions to Nick so that he can answer them for you. But first of all, I want to throw it to Nick, and I want to say thanks for being here with us. Thanks for interacting with us and giving us some knowledge. But first and foremost, can you give us a little summary of what you do?
Sure. So I'm an aerospace engineer for NOAA's Aircraft Operations Center, which you know us better as the NOAA Hurricane Hunters. And so I'm part of a crew of people that flies aircraft into, around, and in front of tropical storms and hurricanes and anything else that pops up in the tropics in order to gather important scientific data. So the spaghetti plot models that y'all throw up on TV and show the 50 different tracks a storm can take, the data that feeds those models comes from our aircraft and what we're able to do up in the air.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point, because the data that you guys do that we have, that it gets ingested into what we refer to as the hurricane models. So those high resolution, medium range models, they are absolutely invaluable, and that data, we can tell a massive difference between before you guys fly through a system and after you fly through a system as to how the models behave. Most of the time, I like to refer to it as a whole lot of guesswork, like a pinball in the machine, and we're trying to talk about where that pinball is going to be 12 bumps down the road from now. And the data that is collected from what y'all are doing helps us to at least get closer to where that pinball is going to be 12 bumps down the road from now. So that's absolutely awesome. You said aerospace engineer. Did you know that they were aerospace engineers?
I don't know. I mean,
I'm not sure that I knew.
Well, so I'm an aerospace engineer. We only have a handful of aerospace engineers, but
Okay.
There's so many different professions that all come together to make these missions happen. So we have pilots, we have navigators, we have meteorologists, we have aerospace engineers, electrical engineers, electronics technicians, aircraft mechanics, just all of these folks, doing what they do best to make sure that we're able to get up into the air safely, collect the data safely, and come back.
Okay, so just along those lines, that's pretty cool.
You get the fun job, don't you? You get the drops on job.
That's
right?
what I was
Yes,
going to ask.
that is my job on the aircraft specifically. So I deploy the drop-ons, which are, for the folks watching at home, are effectively weather balloons in reverse. And so we drop these instruments from the bottom of the aircraft. They have a parachute that deploys, and as they float down through the atmosphere, they're collecting temperature, pressure, humidity, wind speed, and wind direction, which are all very important parameters that we want to know to help predict these storms better.
Yeah,
so there we go. Yeah, perfect.
That's it. So there you can see a picture of exactly what he's talking about, a dropson. So what specifically what he's talking about is that we get a pressure and wind relationship out of these dropsons. So that's kind of how we measure wind speeds when we're talking about they're flying through a hurricane, is that we know their flight level wind speeds, we know what the pressure and wind change is as they are being dropped down, and that relationship gives us a pretty close estimation as to what the wind speeds can be wherever they put that in. And more specifically, it gives us a good 2D reference point as to what the structure of the tropical system looks like, and that helps us on our end really be able to see what's going on there. So that's what he's talking about. That's what he specifically does. So if you could talk a little bit more about how you package these things, and then specifically what you do when you drop them, because I've seen pictures that there's just like a hole in front of you and you just like bombs away like
so it's so they all come pre-assembled with the parachute packed, and the whole instrument is just pretty much ready to launch once we get them. And so my job on the aircraft is to link those instruments up with our data systems on board, and then actually load them into the chute that we have, and then to flip the switch and fire them off the aircraft. And once they leave the aircraft, it's then my job to help do a little bit of quality control and make sure that the instrument is operating as intended. So it's, we can tell by looking at the data stream that the parachute has deployed. We can tell that it's collecting the data that we need it to. And after some initial checks, we just let it fall through the atmosphere. And then once it's splashed in the ocean and finished collecting data, I'll close out those files, send it off to the scientists we have on board, and they'll do some analysis of it and then send it off the aircraft.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's not very, I myself don't look at the data too in depth. It's more of my job to just make sure that things are working as they should be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I do have more of a me-specific question and a less of an interesting question here. Just because I'm unaware, whenever you guys flag something, so say you drop it, initially it's working correctly, and then it gets flagged for false data, what really is the warning sign there that you guys can see, like, hey, this might be suspect?
So most of the times the failures that we'll have with the instruments, the most common one is that sometimes the parachute won't deploy. And if the parachute doesn't deploy, they're just falling, at terminal velocity down through the atmosphere, and you're not getting a clean data profile down through all those levels of the atmosphere. So that's one reason. And then the other reason typically happens just with the surface data, and that's because they're designed to be such that when they hit the water, they're supposed to start sinking immediately, and the electronics get inundated and it just stops working. But sometimes they'll hit the surface of the ocean but still float for 10 or 20 seconds, and that data will still get sent off to the aircraft. And so our meteorologists and scientists will have to go in and figure out at what point did it actually hit the water, and at one point was the rest of this just garbage data from floating in the ocean. Cool. But they are designed to sink down through the bottom, though. So that's why they don't wash up on beaches or things like that. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's I did not know that. So that was good information. All right, we're gonna get into some more of the fun questions that I have for you, and I have to ask. I have done a couple of flights that are not like your standard commercial airplane. Some stuff where you have to deal with turbulence a little bit more, and I can only imagine that flying through a hurricane that I would be asking for Dramamine like candy because I would just be vomiting constantly. So I have to ask, what is the air sickness like? How often does that happen? And, you know, for you, what was the first flight like?
So we'll start with the first flight. And so for me, that was through Hurricane Matthew in 2016. And this was only a month or so after I started on the job. And it was a 2 a.m. flight. So it was a midnight brief for a 2 a.m. takeoff. And I kind of had short notice that I was going to be going on the flight. I was just an observer at this point, so I didn't have any responsibilities on the aircraft. I was new to the job. It was my job to go and observe and learn. And so it was a very early morning flight. I didn't sleep well. I didn't really know the tricks of the trade for, you know, what to eat and what not to eat and that kind of stuff. And the first 2 hours of that flight, these are usually 8-hour missions. The first 2 hours I was fine. And then the subsequent 6 were pretty much the worst 6 hours that I've had in the last few years.
Oh no.
So I got very sick on that flight. And I talk about this all the time. I remember seeing, because Matthew was a Category 4 hurricane at the time. And so we took off in the middle of the night, but you know, towards the end of the flight, the sun had come up and you could actually see out the window. And I remember looking up from just feeling terrible and looking out the window and seeing this, you know, beautiful hurricane eye and thinking, you know, I may not be enjoying this right now, but this is something I definitely want to keep doing. Mm-hmm. And so as far as the turbulence goes, flying on our Gulfstream 4, the high altitude surveillance jet, the turbulence usually isn't too bad. Only so often do the cloud tops actually reach up to our flight level. But flying on the P3s, which are crashing, you know, right through the eye wall down between 8 to 12,000 feet above the water, those flights can sort of be like being on a wooden roller coaster, and you know, there's a lot of vibration and getting bounced around. And it's something that you just get used to over time. And it's also something that there's just little tricks that people have picked up over the years. So like, for me, I always like to have a full stomach when I get on the aircraft, and then I will snack consistently all throughout the 8-hour mission, just because the more stuff that is in there, as we're getting jostled around, less of the stomach acid can slosh around. And I've just had better experience with having a full stomach full of food. So that's just one little, you know, trick of the trade. Also not moving your head too quickly and things like that. So
that might be the opposite of Ross's experience, I think.
It was the complete opposite of my experience. I think I had nothing in my stomach. Maybe that was maybe that's where I went wrong.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah, I got taken up in a fighter jet, a World War II fighter plane, and I was fine until they started doing maneuvers like like the fighting maneuvers where they were chasing each other, and then the up and down motion. I was just like, oh, I'm gonna puke.
Luckily for us, we tend not to invert. We never do that.
No tricks inside the hurricane.
We try to keep ourselves as straight and level as possible. So that helps.
That's probably the key to not
get into the eye, do a loop-de-loop, see what you can get done.
Yeah, I mean the conditions. I can guess that is probably something that very few people see. Even people that go through hurricanes here, that make landfall, very few people actually get to see a clear eye, and the stadium effect that comes along with that. You know, unfortunately for me, even though I went through Hurricane Michael, I was in the western eye wall the entire time, so I never got to step outside and look up and see daylight. I have some pictures from people around the area, but you know, certainly I would much rather experience it the way you experience it and not experience it the way that people here experienced it. So tell us what that's like when you fly through the eye wall and you see the clear eye, and what it looks like, the thoughts, the kind of emotions that it brings about too.
It's always awe-inspiring, especially with the more powerful storms, the Category 3 and above, because especially when that eye starts to clear out and you can see the curvature and you can see blue sky above, it's really incredible to behold. But at the same time, and especially with major storms, and I think about this all the time, whether I'm on our P3s or whether I'm on our Gulfstream 4, is that we're up there to do a job, and that job is to help collect data so that the forecast models can be more accurate, and we're able to warn people ahead of time that a storm is going to show up on their doorstep. And so, especially for me, with some of the more powerful storms that I've played a small part in helping to forecast, that there's a weight on your shoulders with those more powerful storms that all we can do up here is just collect the data and help the forecast and just try to help warn people that something's coming their way. And so there is that weight there, and that's something that's always on my mind, and it keeps me focused and it keeps me motivated up there to be sure that I'm doing a good job, and I think the rest of the crew would feel that as well.
That's awesome. So my question would be, how did you get into this? Is this when you were, studying to be an aerospace engineer, were you just like, yeah, I really want to be a hurricane hunter, or did you not think you would ever be flying to a hurricane?
So when I was in college at West Virginia University, go Mountaineers.
Yeah, go Mountaineers.
I never even knew that hurricane hunting was a thing. So I didn't even know that this job existed until I applied for the job itself, just because I was looking to still work in the federal government and work for a science agency. And I had applied for a job at NASA, and I applied for this job at NOAA, and I ended up getting offered both. And the NOAA job seemed a little more exciting because I was like, oh, I actually get to fly on airplanes and stuff. That's pretty neat. And then, they said, oh yeah, we hunt hurricanes, we'll fly into tropical storms. And I thought, cool, that sounds great. And then the reality of it really hit me after I showed up on the job and started talking to people more in depth about, like, so what are we doing here? And so it's not something I ever really dreamed of getting into, but it's something that I've really grown to love. And it's tough for me to imagine doing much of anything else right now, just because it is such an exciting and such a fulfilling job.
Really an important job, especially, in the times we're in right now, these active seasons, these hyperactive seasons that we've been seeing. It's definitely very important to get all that information, especially to get all that information to the public as well,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, along the seasons, how tired were you by the end of last year? 30 storms. How many did you fly into last year?
So last year, I don't have a solid number of how many I flew into last year, but I know that I flew a lot, and I also I didn't fly at all during the month of September, and I still flew a lot. So, pretty much starting. There was Cristobal at the end of May and the beginning of June, and then I think it was mid-July, things just ramped up and just didn't stop.
Yeah, till December. Yeah, it's not
fun. Yeah, mid-November. Yeah. So I think Ada was the last storm that I flew, and that one was another example of us of going and hunting a storm, and then the storm repaying the favor and
hunting you.
Came over my apartment in St. Petersburg. So you get that sometimes. Irma did the same thing. We in 2017, I deployed with the crew out to Barbados, and we flew a series of missions as it tracked its way towards Florida. And then the missions were finished, and I was in my apartment in Lakeland, Florida, and Irma came straight over. So,
wow.
Irma was actually my first significant storm to forecast for. I was forecasting for Gainesville, Florida at the time, and so that was really the first test of forecasting aptitude on my end as far as tropical activity goes. So I can speak to Irma a little bit and how that all played out. But yeah, I think this is actually the video we've got going up. I believe this is Irma. Is it not?
Yeah, that was in Irma, and so that was me holding up my phone as level as I could as we were going through the eye wall. And this was when Irma was a Category 5 hurricane. So that is, the eye wall as we're making our way through there. And eventually, towards the end of this video, we break into the eye, but it's not well focused because I was in a hurricane. It's, I'm not a professional videographer. I'm doing the best I can up there.
Yeah, I can imagine the adrenaline at that point in time, and then trying to hold a cell phone or a GoPro could be quite difficult, especially with this kind of experience. It's just, when you said that you got there and you were like, wait, so what are we doing now? We're gonna fly through the eye wall of. I can imagine that most people are probably like, this dude's insane. Why would you ever want to fly through the eye wall of a hurricane? And I think that's right there toward the end. Yeah, you can kind of see the clearing of the eye in the video right there. So yeah, that's definitely on a whole nother level. So what is the most memorable flight aside from the first one? Because I'm sure that's always going to stick out. What's the most memorable flight that you can remember?
I think for me, in 2018, we deployed to Bermuda to chase Hurricane Florence, and it was Tropical Storm Florence at the time. And we went out there with our good friends from the Hurricane Research Division, and they wanted to fly missions into Florence because it looked like it had good research value. Because at the time, all of the forecast models were saying it was going to recurve and stay out in the Atlantic. And we flew 3 missions out of Bermuda into Florence, and the first day was it was an 8-hour mission. We flew down to Florence. It was a tropical storm, and then 24 hours later, we flew same kind of mission, flew down to Florence, but 24 hours later, it was a Category 2 hurricane, so it had intensified pretty well. And we're on these missions, we're always collecting data, whether it's for research or whether it has reconnaissance purposes for the forecast models. And then our third mission out of Bermuda, we flew down to Hurricane Florence, and it had intensified to a Category 4 hurricane. So it had gone from a tropical storm to a Category 4 monster in 48 hours, which was really impressive and really just eye-opening about just how much energy is available out there for these systems to soak up and just become what they can be. And on that particular flight, we did 9 eye wall operations. So that's 9 times to and out of the storm. So we did our standard pattern with 3 or 4 passes, and then we had the gas left because we were transiting to St. Croix that day. And so we just worked the southwestern eye wall and just crossed back and forth 5 more times, and then finally made our way south down to St. Croix. So that was that was a really interesting mission, just meteorologically. It was also a really good crew. We had a great set of folks, and so it was enjoyable. And the data that we collected was very important because Florence, instead of recurving back out into the Atlantic, ultimately made landfall in North Carolina. And so the data that we collected helped sort of shift the models that direction, and we were able to help warn the folks up in the Carolinas that it was coming their way.
Yeah, if you're going to pick a storm to research, Florence, Dorian, Michael, Harvey, probably top of the list, I think. So that's one heck of a storm to research. If I remember correctly, forecasting for North Carolina was that it would end up making landfall as a Category 4, and thankfully went through an eye wall replacement a couple, maybe like 6 or 8 hours before making landfall, and weakened pretty significantly as it was coming ashore. Unfortunately, that same process also led to it being a much larger storm and a much slower storm, and dropped a lot of rain. So that was a kind of an odd system all the way around from the beginning to the end of what it inevitably did. So yeah, going back to just the invaluable, I mean, like, there is no measure as to the just what it means to us as people that have to go through this or forecasting it. That information that you guys are able to collect, it is absolutely amazing and awesome for us. So I think I only have one more question to ask, and that question to me would probably be, what surprises do you come across when you go out? I think I remember watching your stuff come across last year. I believe it was a system in the Caribbean. I can't remember exactly which one it was. It might have been, there were so many storms last year. So I think it was maybe Delta while it was still in the Caribbean. That we were thinking from satellite view, it was a tropical storm or maybe even a depression at the point, and you guys flew into it. And I believe you had a picture of the radar, the eye wall, and you were like, this thing's a lot more organized than we thought when we were flying into it. So I'm wondering how often surprises happen as you're flying in.
So that's sort of the nature of this business, is that these storms are so dynamic and constantly changing. And so we are doing our best up there to be sure that we're ready for those changes. So on the P3s, for example, we've got 3 radar systems on board that are constantly giving us information as we're flying through the storm. And even over the course of a single mission, because again, there's usually 8 hours that elapse, between takeoff and landing, these storms can change pretty drastically. So an example that I think of is Hurricane Laura last year, when it was rapidly intensifying in the Gulf. We started a mission on, I think it was Tuesday, like August 25th or something. And when we did our first pass through the storm, it was a low-end Category 3 hurricane. And as we kept crisscrossing and doing our flight pattern, as we were flying through the eye wall, those winds just kept rising and rising. And by the time we landed back, within like an hour, it was upgraded to a Category 4 hurricane. So that's just how dynamic and how quickly the situation can change up there. But luckily we have the instruments and the tools and the people on board so that we can adapt to any kind of change like that as well as we can.
Gotcha.
Well, I think that's the questions for me. Do you got anything left, Grace? Did you come across anything? I'm gonna scroll through the comments here. So
yeah, I was looking through them. I didn't see a ton of things that we hadn't covered already.
If there's anything that you want to add, Nick, any pitches or projects that you're doing on the side, little side hustles that you want to throw in there, this is the time to do it.
No side hustles for me. I'm a company man, so.
I don't want to get you in trouble, man. I mean, we can do this off the air if you want.
No. I guess the point I always try to drive home, no matter who I talk to about this, is that, this is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This is, something that the federal government through taxpayer dollars provides to the taxpayers. So, we're doing the best we can as public servants to make sure that we're providing that value for the people on the ground and making sure that we're keeping people as forewarned and as safe as possible. And that is our goal, and that's what we strive to accomplish. And we feel that we do a pretty good job year after year. And it is a challenging business to be in, both physically and mentally, but we've got some of the best people on the planet. I've got some outstanding coworkers. They're all masters of their craft, and I'm very blessed to play the small part that I do. And so yeah, just so people know that we're all public servants and we're just doing the best we can to help folks.
That's all anyone can do, really.
That's right. I always say that whenever we get into a weather Twitter fight, I'm always like, hey, it's all well and good that we get. Yeah, I don't do that. But what I'm saying is, it's all well and good, but we're all on the same team. Like, we can have different viewpoints, we can have different ideas about how things going on, but when it boils down to it, everybody here that is doing weather, whether it be through broadcast or National Hurricane Center or the National Weather Service or any of the federal branches that are participating in weather prediction, we're all trying to be here for the public. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, is that we are public servants, and that's why we have the passion that we do. I mean, that's why we love weather, is because, it is forever changing, and even as good as we get at forecasting, there's always going to be that well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
And well, why did we see this when this is the outcome that happened, or vice versa? Well, we saw this coming, but that we didn't see this coming. So there's always going to be that, and that's chaos theory down to the very bone. Is just that even if we get most of it right, there's always going to be something out there that is intriguing, and I think that's why anybody that gets in the weather business, that's the driving force. Is, hey, we're going to do our best to provide the information that's going to keep you safe, and at the very minimum, going to keep you knowledgeable as to what's going on. Sometimes safety boils down into the individual, so you can only do so much. But the information that you provide, and everything that you do, and obviously let's have bravado, for lack of a better word, of being able to
Seems
fly.
like an okay word.
For being able to fly into and through tropical systems, I'll have to say thanks again. So if there's nothing else.
There's one thing. What advice do you have for people who want to do what you do?
What advice? Well, so there's a lot of different ways to get into hurricane hunting. Like I said earlier, there's so many disciplines that all come together to make these missions happen. So my path specifically, I studied engineering in college. My first job out of college, I was actually a flight test engineer for the Navy. And then I wanted to, use all of the knowledge that I'd gained to help out with science. And so just having that passion for science led me to this job, and now I get to play the role that I do in hurricane hunting. But we also have meteorologists. So Ross, Grace, if you want to ever shift gears, we need meteorologists.
Take me out with you. I'm ready.
I've experienced
I'm ready to go.
I've experienced enough to know that.
I haven't experienced enough.
Grace seems like she's up for one of the 8-hour flights, man. I'm just saying.
If you'll have
if you want to be a pilot for us, all of our pilots are NOAA Corps officers. So the NOAA Corps is one of the uniformed services of the United States. So they have ranks on their shoulders, and those are our pilots and navigators. But we've also got mechanics, and we've got electronics technicians, and we've got just all of the scientists, just all of these folks that come together to make all of this happen. So there's a lot of ways to get into it, and just find what you're passionate about and how you can apply that to hurricane hunting. And that's how I ended up here. So
awesome.
Very cool. We're gonna wrap things up right here. I think that's a good place to end. As always, if you don't have the StormTrack 13 app, this is a good time to download it. It is a fantastic tool. It's our in-house app, and you can track along those spaghetti models because our app does that. So you can get information straight from the hurricane hunters themselves with those spaghetti models whenever we have tropical systems. And speaking of which, we don't have anything out there of note at the moment. We have a lot of dry air and a lot of shear. Shear looks like it's going to be sticking around for at least a couple more weeks. The dry air, maybe not so much. As we head toward the middle of August, it's typically when we start to see an uptick in activity, and we will more than likely see an uptick in activity as we head toward the middle of August. So you definitely want to stay on top of the tropics. But again, thanks to Nick for joining us. And if you're not following him on Twitter, you should do so. Again, quality content, the content that we might not all need, but we want. So,
yes. Especially if you're interested in weather.
Especially if you like weather, especially during tropical season. I think I saw that you're a Bolts fan, right? Are you?
I live in the Tampa Bay region.
Yeah, I mean,
Tampa
okay.
Bay,
So,
Tampa Bay.
I think I saw some tweets from you about the Lightning way back when.
Go Bolts. Zap.
There you go. Weather all the way around, even when it comes to hockey. Thanks so much for joining us. That's going to do it for this week's edition of Tropic Topics.
Thank you for watching Tropic Topics, sponsored by Peden Heating and Air Conditioning and Mariana Toyota. Be sure to download the StormTrack 13 app today to stay up to date with all of the latest weather information. For more local news, weather, sports, and more, visit mypanhandle.com.